Okay, here we go. Welcome, folks. I see folks joining us this evening on our webinar, and thank you all for joining us here tonight. I'm going to give this another few moments as people roll in. You'll see the chat button at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you're set up, where you can post chats and see information from us. And I'd just like to welcome everyone to the Powering Energy Freedom with Power Purchase Agreements session here at our 2020 National Solar Congress. Thanks for joining us this evening, Solar United Neighbors. We're a national nonprofit dedicated to helping people go solar, join together, and for their energy rights. And last bit is what we'll be focusing on mostly this evening. We usually have these solar congresses in person in the states where we operate field programs around the country, but due to COVID-19 this year, we decided the events needed to go all virtual, and so we've created the first ever National Solar Congress. So we've had weeks of programming throughout the month of October, everything from technology, training, and educational sessions to learning how to advocate for solar in your local community. And then this week, we're diving into some specific sessions about solar in our states. So this evening's session will focus on the ongoing campaigns that we're operating to legalize solar power purchase agreements in the states of Florida and West Virginia. So thank you all again for joining us. And if you are interested in some of the other programming we've been offering this month at our Solar Congress, I encourage you to check out solarcongress.org, and we'll drop that link into the chat box. Solarcongress.org has the entire schedule of programming for this month, and after the Solar Congress wraps up later this month, we'll be making recordings available of all the sessions. So you are welcome to go back and enjoy some of the educational programming you may have missed and share with your friends who you think might be interested. So before we get started, I just want to go through a little bit of light housekeeping for this webinar. You can submit questions at any time through that chat feature. And when you use that chat feature, you'll see a little blue box that says you're typing a message to either all panelists or all panelists and attendees. And if you choose all panelists and attendees, that will help everyone else see the question that you're asking, and other people might have that same question. So please choose that all panelists and attendees option when typing in your questions, if you're comfortable doing that. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share a link to the recording with everyone who's RSVP'd after we have wrapped up this evening, and then we'll make all these recordings available for review later on. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists this evening, of whom I am one. To Autumn Long, Regional Field Director with Solar United. I am based in West Virginia, and I also oversee our field program in a region we refer to as the Heartland region here at Solar United Neighbors. Also joining us this evening is Heaven Campbell, the Associate Florida Program Director at Solar United Neighbors. And Heaven is going to speak to y'all about Florida's campaign to legalize power purchase agreements. And finally, we're really excited to have Evan Hansen join us. Evan is a member of the West Virginia House of Delegates from Monongalia County, West Virginia. He's also the founder and principal of Downstream Strategies, an environmental consulting firm based in Morgantown, West Virginia. And Evan has been and continues to be a real champion of renewable energy and solar in the West Virginia House of Delegates. And we're very pleased that you could join us this evening. Thank you, Evan. Also joining us to facilitate is our engagement specialist, Alexis Miller. So she'll be helping out with webinar technology facilitation and helping to answer questions from panelists to make sure everything goes as smoothly as these things possibly can. So thanks everyone for joining us tonight. So the topic this evening is power purchase agreements. And I'm going to start out with a little video. This video was created by a West Virginia campaign that we are running here. So it includes a little bit of West Virginia specific language, but I think it gives a really good, very brief overview of what is a power purchase agreement in about a minute. So let's listen to this video and then we'll circle back around. And maybe I can press play. There we go.
What is a PPA? It is a power purchase agreement. A PPA is a way to finance renewable energy projects like solar, wind, and biomass. How do PPAs work? A developer installs, owns, and operates an energy project for a customer. A customer purchases the system's electric output. This saves money on their utility bills. Who can use a PPA? Everyone benefits from PPAs. How do PPAs help consumers? By saving money on energy costs from day one and locking in rates to avoid future hikes. Sounds like a win-win, right? One problem, PPAs aren't legal in West Virginia. How can you help? Let your lawmakers know that West Virginians deserve the right to choose where their energy comes from. Visit wv4ef.org to learn more. Email your legislators today. West Virginians deserve PPAs.
Okay, so as I mentioned, that has some West Virginia specific language and actions in it, but it does give you a general overview of what is a power purchase agreement, which is a little bit of a wonky term and concept that people may not know off the tips of their tongues. So just to review, a power purchase agreement is, at its most basic, a retail solar power purchase agreement is a long-term contract to purchase power from a third-party owner and operator of a solar energy generation system. So this type of contract contrasts with direct ownership, in which the property owner themselves owns the solar project. So typically the system will provide electricity to serve an electric load on the host site. So for example, a school or a government building or a business or a home. And so it's generally installed, quote unquote, behind the meter of an existing building and operated under a net metering arrangement. So PPAs, the pricing mechanisms and the details of these contracts vary, but in general, these contracts are designed to offer significant electricity cost savings over the life of the contract. And so there are several benefits that these power purchase agreements offer to consumers. They allow consumers to install solar with zero upfront cost. They lower electric bills from day one for the property owner, and they allow that property owner to lock in long-term affordable electricity rates. They're avoiding potential utility rate increases over the term of the life of the contract, and they're stabilizing their monthly budget expenditures. Also importantly, PPAs allow tax-exempt entities like schools, governments, churches, and nonprofits to access the federal solar energy investment tax credit, which is an important tax credit that's tied to, it's an income tax credit. And so these tax-exempt entities can't directly access it, but by operating through a third-party private company provider, they're able to access the benefits of this tax credit in the form of lowered energy costs for their contract. So as this map shows, PPAs are quite common. They are currently legal in 28 states and Washington, D.C., as well as Puerto Rico. And they look different in different states and territories. There are different size limitations. There are different types of property owners who may be able to use PPAs depending on the state law or code that allows for this, but they are widespread and they're really popular. In fact, over half of all non-residential US solar capacity is third-party owned. So commercial solar and the types of solar that is installed on these tax-exempt entities like schools and governments is more often than not owned and operated through a third party arrangement. And especially for schools, these arrangements are extremely popular and even necessary to allow school districts to access the benefits of solar energy. In fact, of all the solar that's been installed on US schools since 2014, nearly 90% of it has been financed via PPAs. So that's a pretty significant number and really shows you how important these types of contracts are to allow our US school systems to go solar and to lower their energy costs and to access long-term affordable on-site renewable energy. So that is an overview of PPAs, how they work, and where they're available. The primary constraint to adoption of PPAs has historically been state regulations governing the sale of electricity to consumers and the public. These regulations will prevent or restrict non-utility providers from offering these services. And that's the situation in both of the states that we're highlighting today. In West Virginia and Florida, only regulated public utilities are allowed to sell power in those states. And these types of on-site solar power purchase agreements are therefore restricted or disallowed. So I want to spend a little bit of time just emphasizing the benefits that solar PPAs offer to customers. And first and most basically, they allow you to save money on your energy. It has fallen in cost about 73% since 2010. There's an excellent return on investment for solar. And as the federal tax credit steps down, it becomes a sort of time-sensitive opportunity to make sure as many people as possible have access to solar energy when they're still able to capture that federal tax credit that's currently on the books. So electricity prices over the past decade, as this graph shows, electricity prices have been rather erratic, but they've generally risen. And if that trend continues, then we're going to see the types of savings that are really significant based on, future market prospects for energy prices and the typical PPA prices that we see on the market today. So I'm using these slides from an analysis that Evan Hansen's firm Downstream Strategies actually helped us create for our program here in West Virginia. And they crunched some numbers from Virginia's pilot program. Virginia enacted a pilot program to allow for solar PPAs a few years ago, and it's been wildly popular. So popular and so successful, in fact, that it's been very widely expanded in the past year. And so even more of these institutions in Virginia are going to be able to access solar through power purchase agreements, thanks to the expansion of this pilot program in 2019. And this pilot program started only in Dominion Energy's service territory in Virginia, and it placed a total cap of 50 megawatts on eligible projects, which is a minuscule percentage of Virginia's rooftop solar potential. So it's a very small program, but you can see it was really beneficial for a wide range of entities, and particularly schools. That K-12 education and higher education really took advantage of this program. And within 6 years, the program was fully subscribed. So there's a real demand for this type of solar financing. And it's clearly made it easier for entities like educational institutions to access solar in Virginia. Another reason to support expansion of solar through expansion of this type of financing mechanism is that solar creates good local jobs in our communities. Solar installer is actually the fastest growing occupation in the nation. And 1 out of every 50 new jobs in this country is in the solar energy industry. So the jobs of PV installers are these good, skilled labor jobs that are existentially local. They are happening on our rooftops and in our local communities. They can't be exported and outsourced because the solar is being installed here where we live, work, and play. And PV installation jobs are projected to more than double between now and 2026. They have a over 100% projected growth rate. So it's a fast growing industry, and this type of work requires a high school level education. It's a skilled constructions trade type of job, and it's a good long-term living wage job for a lot of people in this country. Just to really drive home the economic benefits of solar and how PPAs can expand those benefits in local communities, solar jobs grew by greater than 20% in each year of the past 5 years leading up to 2020. The solar industry today employs over 50,000 Americans power production. And for those of us living in areas of the country which have historically been economically tied to fossil fuels, I do want to note that there are about 53,000 coal mining jobs left in the United States today, and about 160,000 jobs in the entire coal mining industry in the United States. So solar represents a huge economic powerhouse and an industry that is employing American energy workers in a new type of 21st century American economy. It's creating new businesses, and it's investing dollars into our local communities around the United States. Solar also attracts employers and investments into our communities. More and more often, there are internal corporate commitments that are being made by these major global corporations to use 100% renewable energy. In fact, there are hundreds of major global companies who have made these types of commitments to renewable energy. And as local communities want to attract this type of business and investment, they have to make this energy available, or those businesses will choose not to locate and invest there. So this isn't just tech companies. It's not just the Google and the Amazon, although those are absolutely some of the companies that have these internal commitments to renewable energy. Companies throughout every sector, from fashion to banking to food and beverage to services, finance, all of these companies are more and more often demanding renewable energy, and they're reducing their emissions based on science-based targets that they've committed to meeting. So growing solar allows communities and states to become more economically competitive and attractive to these types of investment. And with that, I think I've probably emphasized the benefits of PPAs and how they work to enough of an extent. So I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Heaven Campbell, to talk about our campaign in Florida and what we're working on there to make PPAs legal for Floridians. Thanks, Heaven. Take it away.
Thanks, Autumn. Thanks for that awesome setup. My name is Heaven Campbell. I'm the Associate Program Director for our Florida program. And we have a baby campaign we just launched on 10/14, so not even a full week ago. Of course, we've been doing back-end coalition building and things to lead up to that launch, but this campaign is definitely in its infancy. We are, as you can see from the map that Autumn shared and the map that's on the screen right now, one of only 7 states that explicitly disallows PPAs legally. So we do that via a mechanism that actually blocks out a few different access points to greater solar adoption. And that's a statute that says that anyone selling kilowatt hours or electricity in Florida has to be a public utility. So we are embarking on largely an awareness and education campaign to help people understand power purchase agreements and what they could do for our state. And we're specifically focusing on MUSH, when that is municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals. Really, any NGO is going to fall into that category, but we know that these are some of the frontline communities for resilience in our state and some of the larger tax exempt entities that can really benefit from a power purchase agreement. So to change these rules, we would need to either introduce a ballot amendment or revise the Florida statutes, which the latter is something that we are hoping to do. But again, largely right now, we are trying to raise awareness and build education on PPAs. So we started by targeting awareness and education via a educational report that we commissioned from the University of Central Florida, and specifically their Rises faculty cluster. So they have a group of faculty members from a variety of fields that have come together and specifically focused their research on renewable energy and sustainability in Florida. And a professor also from Ohio University. He is really familiar with renewable energy and our model and how we help to grow the solar sector and PPAs. So I want to go over just a couple of things that we focused on in this report and some of the really awesome results that we got. So we knew that PPAs would be really powerful in opening the Florida market, but we did not expect them to have as large of an impact as we saw from the modeling. So we looked at 3 different situations. One was a municipality, the city of Orlando, which does have a 100% renewable energy goal, and a school district, the Osceola School District, which we thought was a really good focus because they are already a mixed school district. They have a couple of schools with small amounts of solar, about 7, that they were able to install through some federal Department of Energy grants, which is how most schools currently have solar in the state of Florida, which seems crazy because we're a sunshine state. So most schools that do have solar only have a small amount through these grants. And then they have one school that's pictured here, which is the state of Florida's first completely net zero school. And it is a public K through 12 school, but it focuses specifically on STEAM, which what better way to learn than to get off your bus and be underneath this solar canopy that you can see in the picture. And then the third focus was First Unitarian Church, which is a large church in the greater Orlando area. So these are 3 really good examples of entities that would benefit from a PPA, and they also represent a small, medium, large, small, medium, large type of situation, if you will. So if you go to the next slide, I can really focus in on what we saw from these case studies. So for the city of Orlando, again, they have a 100% goal, and they have actually already evaluated some municipally owned buildings that are viable for solar and made that switch for a couple, like their fleet and facilities compound that's pictured here. But they already had some evaluations done and had pinpointed and honed in on buildings that would be a good host site. So what we saw was that they had a 18 megawatt potential solar capacity that was available and could be utilized to host a PPA. And we saw that just these buildings that were already evaluated could have 39% of their power needs met, which would result in almost $500,000 of savings per year for the city and would support 232 new jobs. And the biggest bang here was that it would have a economic stimulus of $34 million to the construction industry. And this is really important for Orlando right now, which is a huge tourism city and has suffered greatly from the impacts of COVID. Disney just announced almost a 20% layoff, an immediate 13% in the city of Orlando. So this is really powerful right now. And they also have some really strong EV goals, and this could take the equivalent of 1,233 cars off the road. And I won't spend too much time on these case studies, but did want to just show that was like a large impact. Osceola School District, they already have this Neo City Academy, which is pictured here, and know firsthand the impact that solar can have on a budget line item. So if they were to add more, this is actually something that they're currently looking at, adding an additional 2 megawatts. That would provide 3% of the full school district's need and would result in $90,000, about $91,000 in savings per year, and have an economic impact to the local area of over $4 million. So next slide. The small example here was that individual church. So this church had proposals that we helped review, and they need 63 kilowatts. And this would save this one church over $2,000 in electricity bills per year. So if anybody is maybe involved in their church leadership, then you know $2,000 is a lot for one individual congregation. And they would also be able to forego an upfront cost of over $100,000. So that's the biggest number for them. Maybe for a municipality that has a very large budget, the upfront cost isn't something that is an immediate shock to them. They would just have to think about, where does it fit into our annual budget? What grants can we apply for? But for a individual congregation, a capital expense of over $100,000 is really a game stopper. So these are the case studies that we looked at. Next slide. And then we also looked at state level, big picture, what would this mean for Florida? So on we did 3 different scenarios: low, moderate, and high, with high being the likely result after maybe 5 years, like Autumn just shared. The Virginia program was maxed out in 6 years, and here in Florida, we know that we have a lot of solar viability. So on the high end, we could add 2 gigawatts of solar to our state. So that's a lot. And we could also add per year, we are looking at adding over 1,500 megawatts of solar. And then if you go to the next slide, we can also add really large economic impact. I might not have shown that slide in here, but it was like $2.3 billion in economic stimulus to our state. So again, everyone knows that Florida is a tourism state. We've had a lot of setbacks from COVID. There's an estimate from our industry association that we lost 33% of our solar jobs, and Florida was one of the leaders, I think number 3 in the nation in solar jobs. And we were the fastest growing number 1 in the nation for adding solar jobs. It was our fastest growing sector. And it also employed more women than our average sector and 2% more veterans than the workforce nationally. So we had a higher veteran representation in our solar jobs, and hopefully still do. But being able to add that to our local economy is really important because a lot of our economic stimulus is outsourced via tourism. Okay. So some conclusions that we had from looking at what PPAs could do for Florida was that there were really clear benefits to the nonprofit sector, which is what we were looking at and really honing in on. Those tax exempt organizations that, as Autumn said earlier, can't benefit from the ITC and really need this financing mechanism as a way to open up solar savings and benefit from renewable energy. And we would add not only a lot of temporary construction jobs, but we would also add a lot of fringe benefits, economic stimulus, going out to eat, things like that, and O&M, so operation and maintenance, long-term jobs. And then we would also have really strong, tangible, even low impact numbers for both greenhouse gas emission and economic stimulus. And we have not only the report, which isn't too long, it's I think about 12 pages, but also a great one-pager, a recorded session, and more materials. If you'd like to learn more about this, you can just go to solarunitedneighbors.org/Florida PPA. And I think I have that on the next slide. Yeah, so just /Florida PPA. To learn more about it, you can actually sign up to be kept in the loop about this campaign. I know Autumn's going to talk more about their campaign, which is more mature than ours. So we would love for people to get involved, share if you have any nonprofits or even just individuals who are solar advocates who are in Florida and might be interested in this campaign. We're really coalition building and love any feedback about this because this is really new to Florida. And we have a sign-on letter and ways for you to spread the word and share the report too. So if you're interested in learning more, you can definitely reach out to me. And I think if it hasn't already been shared, I'll share our Florida email address. But make sure that you head over to solarunitedneighbors.org/Florida PPA to see all the numbers. I didn't want to bore you with statistics in the report, and even just grab the one pager, share it with somebody that you know in Florida.
Great. Thank you so much, Evan, for sharing that information about the campaign that y'all are launching and getting up and running in Florida, and some of the impact analysis that you've done to really drive home the benefits of PPAs for different users of different sizes and types. We wish you luck, and I'm sure we will be working together on this to collaborate across state lines, which is sort of what we do here at Solar United Neighbors, learning from each other and combining our power. So at this point, I want to circle back to West Virginia and give you all an overview and update about our campaign to legalize solar power purchase agreements here. And I want to start by just setting the stage for West Virginia. We are a state in Central Appalachia that has historically been deeply tied to the coal industry. And we're in a really significant economic transition now as the state struggles to find new replacements for that historical industry economic powerhouse, and also to diversify our economy and become less reliant on a single industry going forward, and to react to the changing realities of a 21st century energy economy that is increasingly driven by renewable distributed energy development. So this map just shows how West Virginia is stacking up compared to our neighbors, and some of the keystone policies that may be contributing to that. And unfortunately, we're not stacking up all that well here in West Virginia compared to most of our surrounding states. We do not have a renewable portfolio standard, which we won't be talking about tonight. But if you want to learn more about renewable portfolio standards, you can check out the recording that we had from our session the other night on that topic. And also, as you can see, we do not have solar power purchase agreements here in West Virginia, which is also contributing to the slower rate of growth of the solar industry in our state as compared to those surrounding states where the solar resources are absolutely comparable, and there's no environmental or technological reason why solar in West Virginia shouldn't be just as competitive and robust as in those surrounding states. So it's basically policy and market mechanisms that are slowing us down. And so what we're doing about it is running this campaign through a coalition that we've developed called West Virginians for Energy Freedom. And this has been our focus for the past 2 years here in West Virginia. Our policy focus is to legalize solar PPAs. And if you're interested in getting involved in checking that out, I encourage you to go to energyfreedomwv.org and read the economic impact report that Evan Hansen and his colleagues at Downstream Strategies helped us prepare to really emphasize the ways that PPAs can grow economic diversification and development in our state through solar energy growth. We have been working hard to outreach to lawmakers and legislators to help them understand PPAs, which is kind of the first step, because a lot of people don't wake up in the morning, thinking about power purchase agreements or even knowing what they are. So just that sort of like public education and really driving home why these contracts are important and how they benefit customers has been a big part of our work. And then really bringing together a diverse coalition of supporters and partners who can speak to how this policy will impact them and how it could benefit them. So that might be mayors and municipal leaders. We've had sign-on letters of support from several cities and counties around West Virginia, and mayors and city councils. Green teams play a big role in that. So like local sustainability teams and citizen advocates who care about these issues can go to their local city councils and mayors and let them know that this is an issue that would benefit their communities through lowered energy costs and increased good local jobs and economic development. So hearing that kind of messaging coming from local business leaders, from local community leaders, from church leaders, from education leaders and teachers and principals, that type of broad coalition building is something that's really significant. And it demonstrates that this is a bipartisan issue, that it's an economic development issue. And we have had bills introduced during the last 2 legislative sessions with bipartisan sponsorship and support to legalize PPAs. And they have not successfully passed through committee. And the main opposition to these bills has come, frankly, from our electric utilities, who don't want any sort of competition to grow more distributed solar energy. They really want to maintain their control and monopoly over how power is consumed and produced in our state. And so it's really been an example of a sort of David and Goliath fight, where a lot of little people could benefit from this policy, but the very large very politically influential utility companies oppose it, and that has ended up playing a pretty outsized role in the decision-making process in our legislature. So West Virginia House of Delegates, his support for this policy, and if you care to share, Evan, what you think is a prospect for 2021 as our legislature moves into session early next year, and what types of strategies you think might be successful to move this legislation forward during the upcoming legislative session.
Sure, thank you. Well, I think it's probably a good idea to first start with the political reality of West Virginia. And part of that is exactly what Autumn said, that among the most powerful lobbies in the state legislature are the electric utilities. And we have two major utilities in West Virginia. The coal industry has historically been also at the top of the list in terms of political power. And if you look at some states that have moved quickly on renewables, like the neighboring state of Virginia, that moved really quickly recently, that was because they had an opportunity where the Democrats control the governor's office and both branches of the legislature. And in West Virginia, it's the opposite of that. So in terms of making progress, we need to recognize, where we stand and do the best we can given that reality. But that doesn't mean we can't get anything done. And I could talk about this in more detail if there's time, but we did pass two pretty good solar bills last session, bills that never would have passed a couple of years ago. And so I think that gives us some hope that a PPA bill might not be that far behind. There were really two PPA related bills that were introduced 2 years ago, neither of which passed. There's the one that Autumn mentioned, which was within our net metering statute, and it clarified that if you entered into a PPA, that the entity that finances the solar system would not be regulated as a utility. So it's a very simple bill within net metering that just makes that clarification. And one of the reasons why it's so frustrating not to be able to pass this bill yet is because we already have net metering in West Virginia. We have a pretty good net metering policy, and there's already caps on the amount of capacity that can be run through the net metering program. This doesn't impact the caps in any way. It just allows a new way to finance these systems. So the state of West Virginia would undoubtedly meet its cap sooner than it will otherwise if we don't have access to this type of financing. But it doesn't mean that there's necessarily going to be more solar in the state. So that's the first PPA bill. The other one that I'll spend even less time talking about was a bill that I introduced that, among other things, that allowed large electricity consumers, over and above what they would be allowed to net meter, to enter into PPAs to build large solar arrays on former coal mines. And that didn't pass, but one of the bills that passed last session, the utility solar bill, had some parts of that bill in it. The utilities maintain control of the new utility scale solar systems that are authorized now, but they are being built on former coal mines or other types of degraded land. I think things are at sort of a turning point in terms of West Virginia politics. A few years ago, neither of the solar bills that passed last session would have passed. There's still a lot of legislators and interest groups that see the decline of coal in recent years as just another cycle and think it's just going to come back. And that's part of the political reality that we're dealing with. Whereas pretty much any serious energy analyst is saying the opposite, that it's never going to come back. There are new realities in terms of the cost of solar and other competing energy sources. And therefore, the state of West Virginia, with all of our coal company bankruptcies and layoffs and decline in tax revenue and things like that, that's a new reality that's just going to get worse. And we had a choice as state leaders. We could either pretend that's not happening and give more giveaways to try to get the coal industry to come back, which is not going to work, or we could recognize that reality and try to attract some of these jobs that we know will come here with some small tweaks in policy, because they're going everywhere else, including our neighboring states, like Autumn showed in her slide. Several of those neighboring states have hundreds to thousands of megawatts of installed solar capacity and hundreds to thousands of solar jobs. And we had just 300 solar jobs, and we've got about 10 megawatts of capacity now. In terms of building support for it, I think last session there actually was a pretty good amount of bipartisan support, especially in the House. And this is what's so difficult about the legislative process, is that I think if we were able to get a vote on the House floor, it probably would have passed the House of Delegates. And in fact, there were discussions up until the very minute of passage of that utility solar bill, of amending the PPA bill into the utility solar bill. But a judgment was made by some legislators that we should take what we can get a couple of historic bills passed, and try as hard as we can to get the PPA bill passed next session. So like I said, I think we've got bipartisan support. I think we have an openness among some of the leadership to give it a fair hearing now that we dispensed with those other solar bills last session. I think the reason why we have bipartisan support, I think the framing is really important. And Autumn is talking about West Virginians for energy freedom, and I think that framing works really well in West Virginia. I think a lot of legislators and people think you should be able to generate your electricity however you want to, and it's a matter of freedom. I think adding on to that and making an even better argument is thinking about what's happened with COVID and how people are really strapped for cash, and schools are strapped for cash, and nonprofits are strapped for cash. And if we can do anything that doesn't raise taxes or regulations, that makes it easier for people to just save money, or for churches or schools to save money, I think that's an important way to sell it. So we plan to make that argument as well. Unfortunately, COVID's had another impact, which is that normally we have what we call in West Virginia interim meetings. I don't know if that's what you call them in other states, where legislative committees come together throughout the off season, and we bring in experts and we study issues. And we were going to be studying the PPA bill during legislative interims in the Energy Committee, but we haven't met once. We haven't met for interims for virtually any committee since March. And I don't know if we are going to do that before the next session. And frankly, I don't even know what the next session is going to look like. If it's going to be a regular session where we're going to consider hundreds to thousands of bills, or if it's going to be very limited to just what the leadership wants us to look at. And we just really don't know yet. But I think if it's at all of a regular session, I think we've got a shot at it. And there's a bipartisan group of legislators that want to push it. So I'm looking forward to the fight. And I guess I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to answer any questions or whatever's next.
Thank you, Evan. I appreciate those insights and your point of view on this. Evan's brought up some really important points about where we've been, how we got to now, and how the current social situation has really thrown into question the types of strategies and tactics that we were planning to use to move forward through this year. And I think we felt pretty optimistic about that legislative interim study, and that we were really gaining support. And then everything that's happened over the course of this year has really sort of turned that all upside down. So as we've all learned this year, we just have to sort of put aside whatever plans that we thought we were going to be able to make, and see how things play out, and be flexible and react to the situation as it unfolds. So that's definitely impacting our ability to plan and strategize. But at the end of the day, as Evan so well stated, we are in and Heaven, you mentioned this too, like there's a lot of need for cost savings, economic savings, and there's a lot of people and places that are really struggling and hurting right now. So the types of policies that we can enact to promote economic development without costing taxpayers any money, without raising any taxes in our local communities, seems to be like really good ideas to enact in this particular day and age. So if you are in West Virginia or you'd like to get involved in our campaign, West Virginians for Energy Freedom is the coalition. You can read the report there about economic growth due to PPAs. If you are a member of an organization or a business or a town to join the coalition, I welcome that. We have over 40 coalition members currently, everything from small local businesses to international corporations to mayors and city councils to nonprofits and churches and economic development authorities. So check it out and get involved, and we'll be happy to work with you to connect with your local legislators so they can hear from you how how PPAs will help your local community wherever you live. And so with that, I think, we can open it up to questions. We have a few minutes before the end of the hour. And I hope this has been helpful to you all, wherever you may be in the United States, perhaps Florida or West Virginia, or perhaps elsewhere. So if you have questions about anything that we've covered or not covered this evening, please type them into the chat, and Alexis is sort of monitoring that and can let us know if there's anything we haven't answered. And again, if you want to get more involved, check out certainly solarunitedneighbors.org is your one-stop shop for all things solar and Solar United Neighbors related. You can get to our Florida page and our West Virginia page from there. And of course, solarcongress.org will give you access to the full programming schedule that we're offering this month. So thanks again for joining us. And Alexis, I guess if there's anything that we haven't answered, you can let me know. I was trying to sort of answer questions as we went.
There was a good question that I've heard a couple times now. And I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear Autumn's take on this as well. Basically, it's from Stephen Moriarty, and basically he's asking why IOUs, so in this instance Duke Energy, why don't they do PPAs themselves? So installing their own solar that they own, and they're acting as a developer on government buildings, churches, commercial, big box stores, so big host sites. So why don't they do that themselves?
So the question is, why do utilities not offer solar PPAs to their customers? Evan may actually have some insight into this. My answer would probably focus on utility tariff programs, and I would think that for the most part, utilities would be offering like a tariff for customers to access renewable energy through a certain rate, rather than getting into the business of actually installing rooftop solar in a distributed manner in communities. There may be examples of some utilities that do this, but I don't know any off the top of my head. I think Green Mountain Power's distributed storage program in Vermont is the one example I can point to where utilities are actually incentivizing their customers to install, in this case, energy storage to help with grid services for that utility district. But for the most part, utility business models focus on centralized large scale power production, and that seems to be the way they want to continue to operate, regardless of what the rest of us want to do. So I don't know, Evan, you may have something to add there, but that's my thoughts on it.
And I would agree with that. And I guess I would add that the cost of solar installations generally goes down when you build a larger scale solar project. So utility scale solar is generally cheaper than rooftop solar, which means that if you're a utility where your business model is based on large scale generation and then transmitting that power to the grid, the most economical way for them to do it would be to build a large scale solar array.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but like the why behind this outside of business model and like the actual install of the solar, there's not much incentive there for them to offer a discount. And when Autumn refers to tariffs, she means an increased cost, and that's definitely the case in Florida. To access solar, Duke Energy has their own program that you pay a surplus, you pay a tariff that is an increased cost for that green energy.
Well, the mindset with the West Virginia utilities, which isn't the same as the mindset everywhere across the country, that they just don't want to lose customers. And West Virginia is one of the only states that's lost population in recent years. So we're also in a different situation compared to growing parts of the country, where it's a little bit easier for utilities to be creative and to do things a little bit differently. Here, it's a difficult environment, and so they really don't want to lose customers.
Great, Heaven. It looks like we got a question if you could repeat the economic benefit to Florida in terms of jobs and economic growth from PPAs.
Yeah, definitely. And you can access this again on that / so solarunitedneighbors.org/Florida PPA. And you can get the full report and then also just like a one-pager, quick and dirty. We did a modeling of 3 different scenarios. So like small impact, medium impact, large impact, just to cover all of our bases. So in the full state, and we also explained how we got those numbers and what the modeling was to get there. So I do encourage you to look at the full report. So the employment impact for like the high scenario would be a total of more than $20,000 construction jobs, and then stable jobs of like 9,000 plus. And then for the high impact, the economic impact was a total of about 2.3 billion. And we go into direct impact and indirect economic impact. So things like permitting and local industry. And we also looked at greenhouse gas offsets. So we had, and energy production. So for greenhouse gas for the high impact annually, it would be around a little over 3 million pounds of CO2 equivalent. I don't know if that answered all of their questions.
Yeah, I think that does. We can maybe do this one last question from Simon, whoever wants to take it from the group. But Simon says, as I understand it, net metering credits you back kilowatt hours, whereas PPAs pay you cash for the electricity you paste back onto the grid. Am I correct?
So I've just typed an answer to that question, but I'm happy to answer it in audio fashion as well. So you are correct about net metering in so much as that net metering allows a solar owner to receive a credit for each kilowatt hour of energy their system produces. Their utility credits them for the value of that energy at ideally the same rate that they are purchasing electricity from the utility. So true net metering offers a 1-to-1 retail rate credit for the energy that's distributed solar generators produce. On the other hand, a PPA is better I would like you to think of it as a financing mechanism, a type of contract. So it allows a property owner to purchase the value of the energy that is produced by an on-site solar array on their own property, rather than purchasing and owning and operating that solar array themselves. They allow a third-party developer to install that solar array on their property and own and operate the array, and they purchase the value, the energy that is produced by that array in the same manner that they would purchase energy from their utility. But in this case, they're purchasing that on-site, behind the meter distributed solar energy through a power purchase agreement. I hope that answers the question.
Something that helps me really understand this, being new to the inner workings of PPAs, is understanding that the developer is going to place their own meter. So the developer will have their own meter and be able to monitor and see all of the electricity produced by the solar install. And then you're going to have your regular meter from your utility as well. You'll literally have two bills. So you'll have a bill from the developer with how many kilowatt hours you produce. And this can vary slightly based on different contract terms. But generally this is a good like blanket way to look at it. And then you will have your bill from any utility usage from the from your utility, and then also you'll have net metered credits on that bill from your utility as well.
All right, folks, we are at 7 o'clock. So thank you all for sticking with us for a full hour here. I really appreciate your engagement and your interest in this topic and all the good questions that we've been receiving. So I hope this was helpful and informative, and I hope it's inspired you to get involved in some of your local solar advocacy opportunities in your state and community. So please follow up with us, ask us questions, reach out if you want to know more, and we really appreciate you, and we thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thanks so much, Evan Hansen and Heaven Campbell and Alexis Miller, for making this a really lovely webinar. So enjoy the rest of your evenings, and have a great night.